Hello, everybody. While we get ready here, we have lots of people in the lobby signing up, joining the webinar. We have so many registrations, so we're going to make sure we give some time for logging in for everybody. So. Hello, everybody. My name is Raquel Hirsch, and I'm the founder of Go Demand Gen. We are a fast-growing digital marketing services agency. We've been around since 2018. We have clients across Canada and the United States, primarily, but not exclusively, in technology, SaaS, and B2B. What we do is we turbocharge our clients' growth while helping them stay lean. This is particularly meaningful in this economy. We got into COVID with 9 consultants, and we came out of COVID with 21. Right now, we have 38 pre-vetted strategists and specialists who have experience in every channel, every tool, every vertical, including AI. We have 300 registrations today. This is unbelievable, but it's probably a reflection of how hot this topic is. So thank you very much for registering. Thank you for recommending friends. We had lots of people inviting their friends and colleagues. We have an amazing roster of people attending. We have CEOs, we have COOs, founders, we have product managers, we have marketing directors and managers, we have data scientists, content creators. It's quite the wide range of professionals that are attending this webinar today. Perhaps even more interestingly is the variety of industries and sectors that are represented in the attendance. We have technology and software, we have SaaS, agri-tech, we have healthcare, fitness and wellness, we have e-learning. We have lots of our clients here and lots of companies represented that we hope see value in becoming our clients in the future. All right, we have a lot to cover, so I will quickly set the stage for today's presentation. So first of all, our goal is to make AI real for your business today. We will quickly cover a general understanding of the technology because you need to know the basics. You need to be comfortable with the basics. Then we'll go over real tactics and paths forward that you can use in your business. So we'll keep it very tangible, very hands-on. And last and not least, because it's probably the most important part of the presentation, we have identified 3 different ways in which you can monetize AI today. So stay tuned to the end of this presentation. Please remember that to post your questions as we move along. We'll try to get to as many as possible during the question and answer period. If we don't get your question, we'll respond by email. So you're covered. After the webinar, you will receive the slides and a recording of this presentation. So sit back and relax. So our presenter today is not Ryan Nadell. Unfortunately, he was called away due to a personal emergency. However, Ryan is the major contributor to this presentation, and he is available to provide AI consulting. For those of you who've already reached out to meet Ryan, not a problem. Instead, this presentation will be delivered by Rory Bradbett. Rory and I have been working together for over 5 years. Rory collaborated in the creation of the deck with Ryan, and I'm actually quite thrilled that he's delivering this presentation because Rory has experience with a number of AI clients. You have them on your screen in front of you, but he's also very hands-on in terms of using AI tools for client deliverables, as well as training clients in the marketing and sales teams on how to use AI for their day-to-day business success. So you're in good hands. Rory is going to do a great job today delivering this presentation. No pressure, Rory. All right, this is the agenda, and then I'll pass the microphone on to Rory. We'll quickly talk about how things are changing and changing fast. This is not news. We're going to talk about ChatGPT and generative AI, talk about uses, ethical considerations and risk, and how you can make AI real for your business today. Thank you very much, Rory. Over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Raquel, and thank you to everyone else for joining. As Raquel said, there's a lot of people here, and again, I think it's just a reflection of exactly how much interest there is in this topic, and for good reason, because as you can see, there's a lot to talk about here. So before we do, thanks again for joining. I'm Rory Brightfit. I apologize, I know you're expecting Ryan today, and instead you've got me with my weird New Zealand accent and my last name that has the entire alphabet in it. So hopefully you can bear with me. But it should be a lot of fun and some interesting stuff coming through today. So before we get into the meat of it, I like to kind of start with where we are at right now in this space. And the reality is this space for us, everyone here on this call, is sort of 5 to 6 months old. That kind of marks the initial launch of ChatGPT, which has now made this space absolutely huge. But things aren't changing fast, things have already changed. And so it's really important that we take stock of what's already happening in the market, because it's a reflection of where it's going to go next. So we've already seen, and you might have seen this in the news as well, companies are getting a massive productivity boost. There's been a report of 50% increase in worker productivity using AI tools to empower them. That's an absolutely insane number. I mean, companies historically have chased 2%, 5% gains. 50% is unheard of. And so that statistic on its own, should be enough to tell you the power of this technology. It is impacting our day-to-day tasks and our roles. So 48% of companies have said that technology like ChatGPT is replacing its workers. And so, we here on this team are of the mindset that, people's roles shouldn't be replaced just by technology. It should be replaced by people using technology. And there's good reason for that. And I'll expand on that a little bit later. We're seeing a greater efficacy as well, not just productivity, but effectiveness and outcomes. So for example, a very recent study has shown that using AI to enhance your sales and marketing copy has boosted the customer willingness to pay by 17%. So that again is also a very, very interesting number, because again, we've come from a world, especially in marketing, where we chase 1%, 2% gains. Anything more than that, and you're dancing off the rooftop. So 17% is absolutely, unheard of again in this space. So absolutely paints a picture of how good this is. However, it's also having some kind of concerning impact on the marketplace as well. And so we've seen already, and you may have seen as well, that ChatGPT, specifically the latest version of it, which is called GPT-4, is outperforming humans in kind of our hardest tests that we have, like the bar exam. Not only is it acing it, but it's doing it in seconds, So that's a little bit concerning. It's gotten to the point where some of the world's tech leaders have asked for this to kind of be put on pause while we navigate through the complexities and put in some regulation, because they're worried about where it can go next, especially when the big companies are trying to compete with each other and move as quickly as possible. And this has also got governments concerned. So Italy, for example, has banned ChatGPT. Canada is also looking to do it themselves. So clearly it's powerful and people are starting to get concerned about it. But the reality is this ship's already sailed. There's not much you can do at this point to just halt it and stop it, especially when we've seen the kind of impact it's already had. No one's going to want to give that up. And so even if you do ban it in one country, there will be workarounds and loopholes to access that technology, because that's what we do. We adapt. And so that's what our philosophy is on this technology as well. It's adapting to it and embracing it, but also being aware of some of the ethical considerations and risks, which we'll talk about a little bit later today. So let's start with what this technology even is. I want to go over this in a fairly simplistic way, because as you can imagine, it can get very, very complicated very quickly. There are computer scientists and data scientists and engineers who have dedicated their lives to this kind of artificial intelligence that we can't do it any justice in this presentation, nor would you actually want to learn the inner workings of it. So I'll kind of cover a high-level version of how these things work. So ChatGPT is an example of something called generative AI. And generative AI, the clue is kind of in the name. It's a type of artificial intelligence that generates new and original, quote unquote, content. And I'll expand on why I put that in quote. It's basically a way of creating content. And this is different to artificial intelligence models from the past. They were all about kind of perceiving existing data and kind of, manipulating it or giving you insights on it. this generative AI is creating net new content. So at the moment, that generally means text, images, video, audio, code for applications, that kind of thing. On the right-hand side of the screen, I've got a few examples of different models in each of these spaces. So ChatGPT is the most well-known one, and it's a text generation AI. So that's all it does. But there are other tools that all they do is image generation. So Midjourney is one example. You may have heard of DALL-E, which is another version of the image generation AI. There's one called Murph that does audio generation. There's one called Runway that does video generation. So generative AI is all about creating. And what makes it really powerful is it's basically trained on so much data that it can create things that appear to be created by a human. And so how does that work? Well, these models are basically fed an insane amount of data, and that data is consisted of examples of what you want the output to be. And what happens is the model looks through all this data and finds the underlying patterns, and it can kind of draw connections and relationships between the patterns. And with that, it can make predictions based on the data it was trained on. And so the whole idea is you give these models, these artificial intelligence models, example data of what you want it to create, and then it predicts, it uses this engine to predict what that could look like when you ask it to create something. So in the example of ChatGPT, its whole shtick is predicting the next word in a sentence. That's how it works. When it comes to something like image generation, it's kind of predicting the next pixel. This is, again, an oversimplified view of it, but it kind of explains, generally speaking, how it works. So here's an example with ChatGPT, for example. Imagine that you right-click on the internet and press download. Not that you can actually do that, but imagine that you could. You download all the text that there possibly is on the internet, and then you upload that into this model and say, hey, learn how to use language based on all of this data. And so what will happen is this model can teach itself after the engineers have kind of set up the parameters and boundaries of it, and teach itself to predict the next word in a sentence. And so we could say to the model, hey, what's the next word in this sentence? The cat's out on the what? And then the tool might predict a few different words based on what it's learned so far, and then kind of reveal to itself what the answer should have been. And then it calculates the discrepancy between its prediction and what the outcome was supposed to be. And that's called loss. And then it repeats that process over and over and over again until it minimizes that loss. But as you can imagine, it's dealing with so much data that it can get to the point where it's incredibly accurate. It's the kind of data that we can't even fathom, as humans in our minds. And so that's what makes it so powerful, because it can actually deal with volumes of data that we can never possibly hope to do ourselves. So that's generally speaking how it works. Here's a visual example. Now, this isn't actually how an image generation AI works. This is just a visual example of kind of what I've just explained before. Image generation AI uses actually a different model of looking at this called denoising, which is another technical kind of aspect that you don't really need to worry about too much. It's more understanding how it works under the hood, which is, again, fed a whole bunch of input data. So imagine there's a whole bunch of pictures of people on bikes, far more than what's shown here. The model looks for emerging patterns and a kind of inherent structure. And so the model kind of starts to recognize, oh yeah, well, there's this kind of shape with these two circular things connected by, what looks to be a frame. And then there's this, what's shaped to be of a person. Okay, yeah, I kind of get it. So then when we say to it, hey, give us a picture of a person riding a bike, it can do so. And it does something that's new and original. And so the output isn't actually exactly the same as any of the input examples that it was trained on. And so that's what makes it so powerful, because it's creating new and original content. And that's the whole point of artificial intelligence. I mean, from the get-go, artificial intelligence was supposed to mimic how our brains work internally. So that's why it's actually so powerful. And I think generative AI is one of the best examples of artificial intelligence right now, because it feels humanistic in its output. And that's why it's become, such a big deal. So how do you use these tools? I mean, that's kind of how they work, generally speaking, under the hood. But of course, it's far more complicated than that. But how does it work for you? And so for you, what it really means is you're dealing with these things called prompts. So what you want to do is you interface with these tools by asking it a question, or giving it a statement, or giving it a task request, and then it responds accordingly. So your input is known as a prompt. So you could basically think of these like questions or task requests. And essentially, once you give it a prompt, it goes through that process that I just explained to predict the next word in a sentence, predicts the next pixel in an image or whatever it may be, to spit something out that hopefully is relevant to what your prompt was. Now, the thing is, it's kind of a daunting prospect of being able to, ask the system anything that you could possibly wish. And so, as you can imagine, there's a bit of an art to it, and it's spawned this completely new role in the marketplace called prompt engineering. And prompt engineering is essentially people that specialize in asking prompts of these systems. But what makes them, I suppose, more of a technical role is that they can utilize these things called parameters, which I'm going to show you shortly, actually. Parameters are things to, add some additional data to your prompt to make sure it gives you a certain type of output. But really, anyone, I talk about prompt engineering and it sounds like it's this complex and technical thing. It is to a degree, but don't let that put you off using it yourself, because at the end of the day, it's just asking the right questions and then knowing how to think critically about what it spits out. There are some systems out there that take your prompt and then manipulate it before it goes through the generative AI model, and that's called grounding. And so Microsoft is a good example of this. I'm going to show you what this means. But grounding basically means it takes your prompt, you can ask it a question, what's the next word in a sentence, the cat's out on the, and then the grounding system says, hey, only answer this question within the context of these parameters that I'm going to give you, so that you're not just speaking open-endedly to this person, that you're actually going to give them an answer that's based on something. Because if you imagine how I explained how this ChatGPT works, for example, it's predicting the next word in a sentence. It could give you kind of anything. And so if you want to have that answer grounded in some kind of reality, as in grounded in your emails, your files, your personal work files, for example, you need some other system in play, which is called grounding. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So here's some examples of a couple of different prompts we can use. I'm going to share my screen and show you what that looks like in a moment. But just quickly, you've already seen it today. We used ChatGPT to create the title of this webinar from the get-go. That title alone helped us get over 300 registrations. We've used Midjourney to create the image for the opening title slide of this webinar. And the point is, we did this in minutes. Whereas in the past, especially for the image, you generally have to write a brief and speak to a designer, and there'd be, back and forth and feedback and scope changes and that kind of thing. We were able to do it in 5 minutes and refine it to exactly how we want it to look. So let's have a look at what these look like in play. So I'm going to show you an example inside of ChatGPT, and then another example inside of Microsoft Bing Chat, which is their version of that technology. When it comes to prompting, there are tips and kind of a bit of an art to follow in terms of asking the right questions. And so what I've got here is what could be considered as a good example of a prompt. And so what I wanted to do is, let's say I'm on the marketing team for a company that does meeting booking software, and I'm building a landing page or something like that. And I need an idea for the opening headline, and it needs to be catchy, it needs to be punchy, it needs to be good. So I'm going to give the tool some context. I want you to act as a professional advertiser. That gives it, a little bit of a context from the get-go of what I'm kind of trying to achieve. Help me write a list of 10 catchy headlines. I'm going to ask it for 10 because it's going to give me some options to play with. For my landing page about meeting booking software, in the style of Eugene Schwartz in his book, Breakthrough Advertising. This is a book that goes back to the 60s, I believe, where Eugene Schwartz kind of did some foundational work on how to write for advertising and conversion. And so I've given it a lot of context to play with. It's aware of the book Breakthrough Advertising because it's very likely been trained on the text from that book. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later around, the risks of copyright infringement and that kind of thing. But anyway, I've given it so much context that it should be able to spit out something pretty good. So let me just go over to ChatGPT right now and let's have a look and see what this looks like. Okay, hopefully you can see this. So I'm inside of ChatGPT right now. When you log in, it gives you a couple of recommendations, gives you some examples on the left. It tells you what it can kind of do in terms of its capabilities, and also explains a little bit about its limitations, which I'm going to go through in more detail a bit later. But you see at the bottom of the screen here, I've put in my prompt that I just showed you. I want you to act as a professional advertiser. Don't need that quote mark. I'm going to press enter. And it starts spitting out its answer right away, instantly. The first thing you'll notice just while it's doing this is that it kind of speaks in a kind of natural way, which is this whole point, right? It's meant to come across as a kind of human. And so it doesn't just say, here are 10 headlines. It says, sure, here are 10 headlines for your landing page. And it repeats the context that I gave it so that I know it's, doing the right thing. So it's given me 10 options here, and each of them generally will have a slightly different take. And so what you can do is you come through here, look through them and refine them. And you might say, oh yeah, I like options 2 and 3. Can you rewrite them, but from the first person perspective? And now it's going to do exactly that. So see how it's changed it to simplify my meeting process today or maximize my time efficiency. It's understood my context. And I think right here is one of the most compelling things or features about ChatGPT, is that it remembers your conversation. And so you can have follow-up conversations. So I now can say, great, I like number 1, but make it shorter. And you can continue the conversation back and forth, back and forth. And that right there is absolutely amazing. I mean, when I first experienced that, I couldn't believe it. I was like, how does it know what we just talked about? Because I'm so used to this world of Google, right? Where you input something in Google, you press enter. If you want to search for something else, it runs the search from scratch all over again. So this being able to run back and forth is absolutely amazing. And as you can imagine, there are so many different things you can do with it. And I'll touch on what those different things are a little bit later. So let's look at the exact same thing, but inside of Microsoft Bing Chat. Now, Bing Chat, like I just touched on before, and maybe it was a little bit kind of vague, is Microsoft uses this concept called grounding. So what's going to happen is I'm going to paste this same exact prompt inside of Microsoft Bing. And let's look at how the system spits out an answer, because it's a little bit different. First of all, you notice it's slower, and that's because it's actually searching the internet, finding resources that are relevant to the prompt, and then grounding its response based on those resources. And so instead of letting the generative AI just kind of run wild with it and predict the next word in the sentence based on all of the data it's been trained on, instead it's doing that same thing, but within the context of these websites along the bottom. It's showing us here, learn more. It's showing us this referencing. And so what makes that kind of interesting is that, yes, it's slower, but now you know it's grounded in something other than just a prediction of the next best word in a sentence. It's actually grounded in, things that people have written recently online. Now, of course, just like Google search results, it's up to you to go through and vet those responses, look at those websites and make sure that you think they're credible. But still, I think that's, the most critical difference between ChatGPT and Microsoft Bing is that component. So that's at a very high level, that's using prompts inside of this kind of technology, and maybe a quick look at Microsoft Bing. Let's have a look now at another one. So I'll go back to the presentation, and I want to show you what it looks like inside of an image generation platform. So let's look at one called Midjourney. So Midjourney is an image generation AI platform. And you'll notice here in the example I've given you of the prompt, a couple of different things. One, the prompt is not written in a kind of typical conversational sentence structure. ChatGPT, its whole thing is, natural language. And so you can speak to it in a natural way. You can write to it as if you're writing to a person. You can do the same inside of these image generation tools, but generally speaking, it works better if you just give it short, distinct, brief instructions. So what I've said here, just for the sake of examples, landing page hero image. I don't need to say, please create me, because that stuff is just not necessary. So landing page hero image with the Eiffel Tower made out of parrots, in the style of Vincent van Gogh, make it 3D, make it vibrant in its color. And now what I've added to the end of this are these things, parameters, which I touched on before. This gives the prompt some instructions. So I've said, I don't want to see any water, so no water. I've said, give it an aspect ratio of 16:9, which basically means make it landscape instead of square, because if you don't put that in there, this tool will spit out square images, and that's not what I want for a landing page. So let's see what this looks like inside of Midjourney. So you'll see I'm inside of Midjourney now, and you will see I've already had a little play around with it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the tool and put in the prompt, imagine, because you have to start every prompt into this tool with that. I'm going to paste in the prompt that I just gave you and press enter. It's going to take just a few seconds to start spitting this out. While it's doing that, I'll show you some of the features of this platform that make it quite interesting. So here's an example up here where I've asked it to do the same thing, but I said make it out of the Eiffel Tower out of potatoes, because that's just a standard thing to do, isn't it? And so it's given you 4 options. It always gives you 4 options. And what you can do with it once it's spat out these 4 options is you can say, well, I like option number 3 here. So it goes in order 1, 2, 3, 4. I like option number 3. So please upscale that, meaning give me a high res version. I'm happy with that. Let's kind of make it final and export it. Or you can say, I quite like option 1, but I just want to see some different versions of it. So you can press V1, variation 1. And what will happen is it will run the algorithm again, but just for that one particular image and give you 4 different versions of that style. So let's see what it's come up with the Eiffel Tower made out of carrots. Now, remember, I asked it to create a landing page hero image. And so it's kind of done some interesting things here. Each of these look quite good to me, honestly. Now, of course, some of these are abstract, and generally speaking, the output always is kind of abstract. For example, option number 3 here, I mean, the Eiffel Tower is coming out of the screen. That's not helpful to me because I want it in the screen because it's for a landing page. But there's no worries because it's still giving me a good idea. And what I could do is I could upscale this image on number 3 and cut out the image of the Eiffel Tower and then put it on my own background. And that's exactly what I did for the webinar opening title slide. I had that picture of the bird, but it had some stuff around it. So I went into Photoshop. There's also other tools you can use online, including AI tools that remove the background for you. And then you slap it onto the landing page and you're done. So let's just, for the sake of example, do some variations. Let's do variations in number 4. So I press V4, submit. Now it's going to take this option here, the bottom right, and it's going to give me some slightly different variations on it. They're not going to be wildly different because if I wanted it to be wildly different, what I'd do is I'd press regenerate response and it'll run the whole thing again from scratch. Now, one thing I am going to touch on a little bit later in the presentation is these tools generally do, each prompt gives you a unique response, meaning you don't always get the same response even if you ask the exact same question. So that's something to be aware of, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later as to why. But generally speaking, for example, in ChatGPT, if you ask it a question, the exact same question twice, it will potentially spit out 2 different answers. And one reason for that is because it's always just predicting the next best word in a sentence, but it does so based on probabilities. And so it's not always 100% probability for the next word in the sentence being the correct word. So there's always going to be some variation. Then also there's a baked in setting that they call temperature, which basically tells it how much variation do you want in these responses. And it's an interesting thing because you might think to yourself, well, I don't want any variance. I want it to give me the same answer every time. But that's not really how natural language works. That's not how the human brain necessarily works either. Ask us the same question twice will quite often give you a slightly different answer each time. So all to say, it's all part of it's trying to come across as human, and that's what makes it so powerful. This is taking a little bit of time to create the variation, so maybe I'll come back to that. And I'll give you another example while we wait. Let's go over to something called Runway. So Runway is a video AI generation tool. And so what you can do is you can upload a video, any video you're choosing, and then you can give it a style reference and say, hey, I want the video to look like this, and it will kind of overlay the 2 together to create an output. This system, Runway, can also do a whole bunch of other things. I mentioned just before, AI tools can remove a background, right? So this is one feature of this tool. It also has, similar to Midjourney, what I just showed you, text to image, meaning write in some text, it spits out an image. But here's an example of what it looks like when it's finished running. This is just a video that I took off my phone of me talking. This is an old video. I just slapped it in there, gave it a style reference of what's called claymation, and this is what it spat out. So this is only a 3-second video. It's just looping over and over again. And it's just for the sake of example. If I wanted, I could do a full 10-20 minute video this way, but then you start paying for it, obviously. So it's as you can imagine, from a marketer's perspective, this is pretty powerful because not only have I done something, created this quite vibrant video within 2 minutes, it opens up all these possibilities in terms of grabbing attention and creating interesting and unique creative ads. So instead of scrolling through your LinkedIn feed and seeing the typical talking head, imagine if you saw this vibrant claymation person in the middle of your newsfeed. you would stop. I mean, you may not watch the whole thing, but it would stop you in your tracks, right? So it opens up so many possibilities, not just obviously in advertising, but also in general, movie making, video creation, outside of advertising, all sorts of opportunities. So looks like the Midjourney doesn't want to create variations of that Eiffel Tower, but you generally get the gist of it. So that's kind of at a high level how these tools work. There are also, like I said, a whole bunch of other ones out there. I mean, these are just a few examples of hundreds of tools that can do this. Inside the presentation, by the way, that we'll be sharing with you after this call is a few tips for both ChatGPT and for image generation. A couple of tips of commonly used prompts that give you great results. So have a look at those and play with them. This is a landscape of the natural language generation AI. So, I showed you examples of natural language with ChatGPT and Microsoft Bing Chat, but outside of that, we've got the image and the video. But just around natural language, here's the current landscape. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but all to say, these are some of the key players right now. As you can imagine, Microsoft and Google have their own versions of it. But ChatGPT seems to be the one that everyone's gravitating towards because it came out first and it made a splash, and there was so much talk around it in the marketplace. But this space is growing every single day, and what you need to be aware of are the challenges or the limitations of each. And I think the most important takeaway, which I've already touched on, is the fact that ChatGPT is not connected to the internet, whereas Microsoft Bing is. So because ChatGPT is not connected to the internet, it's only trained on a bunch of data up until 2021, and after that point, it actually doesn't have a reference. So if you speak about current affairs that have happened today, it won't actually know anything about it unless other people have been asking about this and inputting that data. Because how ChatGPT works is it's trained on all of this data up until 2021, but it's also trained on the data that you input. So it's learning based off of what you're putting in there, or all of us are putting in there. And there are millions of people using this tool, millions. And so you can imagine that's why they've made it free, right? Because they understand that we're going to give it all this data for free, and it's going to make it much smarter and much better, hopefully, than its competition. So why is AI suddenly such a big thing? I mean, why has ChatGPT popped up in the last 6 months and then all these versions of it? It seems to have come out of nowhere, right? AI has been around for a while as a general concept, but there are different ways of doing it. And as I mentioned earlier, historically, AI has been all around perceiving data, manipulating data, not creating data. So how has this come to be? Well, do you remember about 10 years ago, the biggest trend was big data, especially if you worked in business, everyone was talking about big data, and they weren't wrong. Data is really the key. What they had incorrect was the scale. So back then they were talking about, access all the data at your fingertips as a company to create better experiences, better products, secure your position in the marketplace with, having all this data. Data is the key to everything. What was incorrect was the scale. So it's not big data, it's enormous data. It's almost unlimited data is what's changed. And so today, we're not dealing with just all the data that one company has access to. We could feasibly deal with all of the data on the internet. It's multitudes of a magnitude higher scale than big data, what we're used to. But what do we do with all that data? We can't just have all of this data and say, great, now what? We need something to process it. And so that's where computing power and cloud power have kind of grown together in the last few years to become far more powerful than they've ever been before. And so what used to take maybe days, hours, years, whatever to process, it can now happen kind of instantly, and it can happen over the cloud. So the difference is, back in the day, you would have had to have had your own supercomputer in your office or wherever processing this data. Well, now you don't need that, because all those computers and servers are being operated by the likes of Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services. We can just tap into their supercomputers to run it for us, and it does that over the internet. And so computing power and the speed of the internet, all of that have come together to make this feasible. And then finally, actual improvements inside of AI itself. So the algorithms and the modeling and the technology behind AI and processing data has evolved. Especially in about 2017, there was this big change in implementation of this idea called a transformer. And that's actually what ChatGPT is. The GPT stands for generative, if we know what that means. Pre-trained, which we also touched on, it's trained on all the data, and then transformer. That's the kind of underlying type of neural network that powers it. So all of these things have come kind of together roughly at the same time to make this feasible. And that's why it's suddenly so big and so popular. And as you can imagine, all three of these things are going to continue to evolve as in the future. And so it's going to become even more powerful. So what does this mean for you in reality in the workplace? There are so many business opportunities. So what I'm going to do is touch briefly on kind of what these are, but we're also thinking of doing another webinar in June where we go into much more detail about each of these and actually showing you perhaps a live demo of as many of these as possible, kind of like what I just did with the prompts, but now going specific into how you can use it with these opportunities. As you can imagine today, we don't have time for that. Today's kind of more of an introductory high-level view of the technology. But first and foremost, I think there's a huge opportunity in productivity. We've already seen 50% increase in productivity according to early research studies. I mean, really early research studies. Hey, these are 5 months old. So, you can, I think one great example right off the bat, which we could feasibly do today, is summarize the meeting notes from today's call. So what I could feasibly do is get an AI tool to give me a transcript of this video. I can upload the video into the tool. It'll spit out a transcript, assuming you can understand my New Zealand accent. And then I can take that entire transcript, paste it into ChatGPT and say, hey, give me the key speaking points from this presentation, and it will do so. And you can say, make it shorter, cool. What is going to be really powerful and coming out soon is Microsoft Copilot. You may have seen this in the news, but essentially what that is it's integrating technology like ChatGPT right into the products that you use every day, like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, etc. What is going to make this so powerful is that essentially it's going to be like, an assistant, they call it a copilot. They can automatically create work for you, but grounded on the data from your business. And so what it's going to do is you'll ask it to do something. Hey, please create meeting notes from today's meeting and then email it to the engineering team at 3 o'clock today. And it will do all of this automatically. But what it's going to do is it's going to send that prompt that you gave it through the natural language model, ChatGPT. So it's going to predict the next best word in the sentence, but it's going to do so based on all of the data that your company has. And so it's going to look through your emails, it's going to look through your files, and it's going to use that to kind of give it a bit of a boundary, bit of a context, and give you, highly relevant answers and outputs based on that. So that's going to be really, really powerful. As I touched on already, marketing content is going to be a big one. So I showed you the video. That's just one small slice of what you can do with it. We saw that, there's 17% increase in people willing to buy when you use AI enhanced copywriting. So there are umpteen examples of what you can do with marketing content. You can write entire press releases. Obviously, you can come up with really catchy images and video. That whole landscape is changing for sure. SEO, you can, for example, you could copy all of the content from one of your competitors' websites, paste it into one of these tools and say, hey, give me the most commonly used keywords. There are other tools that can do this already and not based on AI. But then the most powerful thing is that you can then follow on the conversation from there and say, great, well, based on these keywords, can you please write SEO titles and descriptions for these 12 pages on my website? It'll do it. And I think a big one we've already seen is creating SEO optimized blog content. As you can imagine, that's right up the alley of ChatGPT. If you say, hey, write me a 1,000 word article, use these 3 keywords, it will do so instantly, and it will be a satisfactory level of quality. It won't be amazing quality though. I think that's the key thing to keep in mind, is that the output is never necessarily amazing. It's just kind of good. And so, that's something to keep in mind. Sales content, I'm not going to go into too much detail on all of these, but you can imagine you can write really quickly personalized outreach, whether it's emails or LinkedIn messages. You can create cold calling scripts. You can do an entire sales presentation using this technology. Customer experience, as you imagine, chatbots going to be a big one in this space. Customers interacting with chatbots instead of humans. That lowers your operational costs, but while still retaining a high customer experience. We're going to see, IT and engineering has already seen a massive uptick in people using it to write code or document their code, review their code. And another kind of side benefit that people aren't really speaking about is the fact that you can use ChatGPT to create good tickets, because I think, that's been a challenge in the past when other teams are interfacing with IT and engineering, and typically you do so through writing tickets. Writing a good ticket is an art, and so now you can get the ChatGPT to do it for you. Risk and legal, it can go through contracts, look for errors, spot opportunities. Human resources, you can write personalized job descriptions. You can paste someone's resume in there and be like, hey, does this match? Is this a good fit for our job description over here? You can ask it to help you respond to really complex, on the edge situations in your office place. Research and development, as you can imagine, you can use this technology to discover completely new ways of looking at things, because it has access to so much more data than you have in your head. And so, we're seeing some interesting uses of that already. And then finally, one that I like to always put in here is using it from a personal standpoint. So not just in the office, but using it to enhance your personal life. And so you can say, hey, I've got these ingredients in my pantry. Can you please give me a meal plan for the rest of the week? And you don't have to think about it. It's done. You can use it for all sorts of things. The world is your oyster when it comes to this, but utilizing that technology to make your personal life more efficient and optimized does flow through into the workplace as well. So I think it's an important one to keep in mind. And this list continues and continues and continues, which is why we would like to do another webinar specifically on these, and we'll give you some real live examples from each of these different categories. So it's not just opportunities in the workplace in terms of the teams that you're already familiar with in your roles. It's also creating, brand new applications or new versions of applications. And so, we'll be seeing entire movies and video games and plays being written and created entirely from scratch in AI, from the script through to the visuals, through to the audio. Feasibly, all of that can be done by AI. Right now, if you did it today, it would be very noticeable, and you could tell it's based on AI and maybe feel a bit synthetic and cold, but very shortly, that's going to be, very, very difficult to tell. Medicine, we can develop new protein sequences using this technology, new methodologies, new technologies. Astronomy, we can plot new paths to planets, plot paths to potential threats. And the reason why I think I should just quickly take a moment to explain, how that works is generative AI is great for filling in the gaps. And so, yes, we've already got technology that can see into space and plot certain paths and all this thing, but what we don't have is a complete and holistic view of everything. And so what we can do is feed the data into the model and say, hey, we know this, we know this, we know this. Can you fill in the blanks? And it will do so by predicting the next, most obvious point in that map. And so it fills in the blanks for us. And that's how we can develop all these new protein sequences, for example. It's how we can, plot new paths to planets. It's really good for that. And so it's still generative. It's still creating in that context. Entire businesses can be spun up from AI. So you can be like, give me a brand, a website, write the code for the app, and tell me the best sales process for this business. And it could feasibly do all of that for you. And then finally, safer and better transport. We already know that companies like Tesla utilize a whole host of technology to enable things like self-driving. And that's going to become much, much more powerful because, again, we can use generative AI to fill in the blanks. So it's going to give us a more accurate view of the world around us and therefore a safer transport. I think, because I said we're going to do a webinar on this later in the year, but I think one thing that you should be doing right now is, if you haven't already, create an account for ChatGPT. I really hope that you have done this already. If you haven't, I would say that's absolutely a must do. Because it really takes playing with it yourself to understand how it can, impact your life and your workplace. Here are just 4 ways you can use it. One, you could use it to help brainstorm something. So if you're trying to come up with new ideas, ask ChatGPT to do it for you. See what it spits out. Use it as a writing and summarization assistant. So use it to write emails or summarize meeting notes, that kind of thing. Use it to help you do research. So you could say, hey, look, I'm trying to come up with a new idea for the marketing plan. But I don't know enough about, for example, advertising in Facebook. Can you please tell me something about that? And it will help you do research based on Facebook. And it might say, hey, look, based on Facebook's data, we don't think it's actually necessarily the best tool for you to advertise because your target market's probably more likely to be in LinkedIn, that kind of thing. And then finally, visual concepting. And so I showed you before in Midjourney how it can spit out these really great images, but the problem is they are flat images. And so meaning that you can't open up the file and just like very nicely pull out the picture of the Eiffel Tower and then pull out this thing over there. You have to manually do that at the moment. I believe in the very near future, that should be automated too. But in the meantime, you can't just take an image and run with it. You have to do some manual intervention, which is why it's good for concepting rather than actually doing final designs right now. And so it's really good for you to go out there and say, give me some ideas for a landing page. Give me some ideas for a social media image, and it will help you, kind of like mood boarding, create a host of different options. And then maybe what you could do is take that inspiration and then give it to your designer and say, hey, look, I like this, I like that, I like this. Can you do something similar? So visual concepting is really powerful as well. But the main point is get in there and start playing with these tools. It's free. ChatGPT and DALL-E, which is their version of the image generation, free to use. Get in there, get stuck in. Now, like with any big technology, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think this is a critical place for you to pay attention because it may impact your business in a big way. So depending on what you do. So the first and foremost, I think, there's a big risk around data privacy and security breaches. So there's a bit of a problem, and you may have seen, there's headlines in the news of these companies where, they are putting in their own kind of IP into these tools. And so, for example, let's say you're an engineer or developer and you're coding some next gen technology for a company like Samsung, and you paste the code in there and you say, hey, ChatGPT, can you find any errors for me in my code? Well, now that data that you've given ChatGPT, technically they've got access to it first and foremost. So it's actually sitting on a computer, a server somewhere that therefore is a security risk, right? Because now it's outside of your own internal security. It could therefore be breached. That's one risk. But the other, and maybe the more scary one, is that ChatGPT is learning from everything that you put into it. And so if you're putting in your own IP, well, then feasibly ChatGPT can create the likeness of your IP for other people. And so that is something to keep in mind. And so at the moment, I wouldn't go putting anything too protected in there just yet. Obviously, there's a risk of job displacement as well. We've already spoken about that. Again, we think it's not a world of AI replacing people, but people using AI replacing people. And again, I think this comes back to our philosophy, which is, we need to adapt to this technology and embrace it and find ways to integrate it in our lives rather than, run scared from it. There's also the risk of generating, fake or incorrect or misleading content. So let me start with the incorrect side. Remember how I explained how ChatGPT works? It predicts the next best word in a sentence. Now, if you go into more detail around that concept, it actually means it doesn't have any kind of concept of what you're talking about. All it's doing is predicting the next best word in a sentence. So it doesn't actually understand the grounding principles and concepts of what you're discussing in the same way that we do. I mean, we've got the context of the world around us and the way we were raised, and our brains actually, work slightly differently to this. ChatGPT isn't an exact replica of how our brains work. So as you can imagine, sometimes it actually literally hallucinates in that it creates content or spits out content that is completely infactual, is not correct at all. And so it's up to you to make sure that the data it's spitting out is actually going to be accurate. And that's why at the moment, I think it's best used in creating in the creative side of things. So like I said, visual concepting, where there's no necessarily wrong answer, just ideas. I think it's a safe space to play right now. They are getting smarter and more accurate over time. So in the future, that will be less of a consideration. There's also, obviously there's deep fake technology, which you've already seen. You can create entire fake plots and storylines and imagery and that kind of thing. As you might have seen in the news, ChatGPT invented a sexual harassment scandal and named a law professor as the accused, and the whole thing was made up inside of ChatGPT, but done to such a realistic point that it's believable. So you've got to look out for your reputational risk as a company in terms of either you yourself creating content that could be perceived as fake or misleading, or other people doing it. And then finally, there's this copyright infringement. So this is a bit of an interesting one because remember how I said, it was a gross simplification, but I said ChatGPT, feasibly is trained on all the data on the internet. Well, as you can imagine, a lot of that data on the internet is copyrighted. It's not actually yours or the models to take and run with. And so we're seeing examples already of companies suing some of the companies behind these models for saying, hey, look, you've actually used copyrighted data in the training of your model, and that's going to be a problem. So all these are all kind of ethical considerations, some of them, but other ones are actual risks, especially the IP risk. I think that's a really major one for you is keep making sure that you don't put anything too protected into ChatGPT. Now, they are trying to do things to circumvent this, supposedly. So there's this thing called the Responsible AI Framework, which is kind of some protocols and processes to help the models become more responsible and to circumvent some of those risks and ethical considerations that I just touched on. But the problem is, especially with ChatGPT, is that they're not transparent around how they use your data. And so, you have to kind of take them with a grain of salt in terms of, are they actually following this framework? Can I trust them? So let's talk about some things you can do today to take advantage of this technology. And really, there are kind of only three ways of doing it, in our opinion. There's three ways. The first is to build new products, new tools that are based on AI. The second is to integrate AI into the apps and products you already had. And the third is to kind of lower your operational costs and increase your productivity by seizing some of those opportunities that I spoke about before in the workplace. So let's talk about the first one, building net new applications and tools. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of growth in the space at the moment. 5-10 years ago, everyone was trying to create the next Uber of something. Well, now it's creating the next ChatGPT of something. So there's this, as you can imagine, there's going to be a huge amount of opportunity, and some really fantastic, long-lasting products will come out of this. Just a bit of a race to see who creates what first. So as you can imagine, companies that are already working in the AI space, for example, they're working with multiple clients that they develop maybe AI products already for them. They're in a great position because they've got the reach across different verticals and sectors, that they can come up with new technologies fairly easily based on that. And then companies that live and breathe AI technology already are also potentially in a position to build these new tools and applications. But you just have to be careful of the fact that it may be even too late now. Some of the bigger players have already pivoted into some of these spaces where competing with them might be genuinely just too much to tackle. Where we've seen other examples of companies who are feeling this pressure, especially from board members, etc., to jump on the bandwagon and start creating tools and applications in AI when it doesn't actually make sense, in the context of their greater overarching strategy. So you need to be careful of that. And if you are looking into building new products and AI technologies, think, does this fit our strategic vision? What is our competition like? Is this feasible? But that is one way of using AI right now. Second is integrating it with the tools you already use. So this is probably maybe a slightly lower hanging fruit, because we've already seen that there's some fantastic examples of this already, like Microsoft and the Copilot, which is coming out. That seems to be an obvious one, but think of any other popular app that you use right now and think about how ChatGPT could be integrated. You can imagine there's possibilities everywhere. Now apply the same thing into what you build. You can enhance functionality, you can enhance the effectiveness, you can enhance the user experience, you can enhance the speed. You can do so much by integrating AI with the apps that you already build. And on the screen here, there's just a few bullet points of different ways you could do that. So one way to take advantage of number one or number two, which is building your own or integrating your own, is you could jump ahead of time a little bit and just bring in someone to get you there faster, rather than try to upskill internally to get to that point. So that's where someone like Ryan could come in really handy. So he can educate your team from a technical standpoint, to bring them up to speed on what this technology is. Ryan very likely will go into more technical detail, because if you're looking to, for example, build or integrate AI, you're going to have more of a technical understanding of how it works. So he can raise your team's education in that space. He can run these kind of what if sessions where, what if we did it this way? What if we created that? Go really, really broad in your kind of brainstorming. But then I think what is specific to Ryan that will be so helpful is that he can then bring it back to reality and say, hey, look, this option over here, really great, but it's not actually feasible for this reason, that reason, this reason, from a technical standpoint. So he can kind of anchor your ideas inside the technical foundations and capabilities that you have. Similarly, he can kind of, look at opportunities to see where ChatGPT or technologies like that can fit in with your initial offering. So, run a similar kind of what if session, but rather than for building new products, it's for integrating products. And then from there, let's say you together you work to find something that could be feasible. He can help you create a prototype that validates whether it's going to be, worthwhile. And then from there, even help you implement it and scale it up. So that's the first two ways of using AI that you can take advantage of it today. And the reason why we, recommend bringing in a consultant is not necessarily for our own benefit, but mostly because it's such a fast moving space that we've already seen that, it's gonna, by the time you internally upskill your workplace, it may be too late. And so bringing someone in that's pretty up to speed in the space is a quick way to kind of bootstrap your team. The third way of utilizing this technology is what I've touched on before, which is, kind of lowering operational costs and, by association, increasing your productivity by using these tools in the workplace. And so, of course, not only could, we could come in and train your team in how to use this technology so they can take it and run with it, give them all the best tips and strategies for prompting, to, hey, here are the top tools that we recommend in this space, and here's the pros and cons of each tool. Bring them up to speed so they can take it and run with it, or we can actually come in and use those tools on your behalf to produce work. So, as we already saw at the start of this conversation, things have already changed and they will continue to change really quickly. And so finding ways to increase your productivity and lower these operational costs isn't really something to put on the back burner. It's something you should look at today, because as you can imagine, it's going to become a kind of burning priority for you pretty quickly once you realize that your competitors have already started doing it. So again, we could come in and help you in terms of educating your team, how to use this technology, how to use prompts. Here are the best tools to use. And we could actually use those tools on your behalf. So you could, instead of working with a designer to, create something, we could just use the AI technology to do it for you, taking advantage of our kind of natural understanding of prompting to get the right output. And then finally, there's a kind of a wider educational piece here where it's not just bringing up your marketing and sales team up to speed, but your entire team. We could technically run a webinar just like this, but for your wider team, but make it specific to your company and your industry and your vertical. And so, it wouldn't be a broad kind of overview like this. It'll be slightly more tailored to exactly your company. And that just makes it more real for your team and helps them understand, where the opportunities are. So that was a pretty rapid and high-level overview of the technology, and thank you for those of you who are still here for sitting through that and bearing with me as I went through that so quickly. As you can see, there's a lot to take in, and it's it can be daunting, but also it's really exciting. And so that's why we think that it makes a lot of sense for you to start playing with it yourself. I mean, that's something you could be doing right now. You could be playing around with it, and then B, maybe bringing in an expert to help you bootstrap your team and your capabilities so that you can catch up to where the market is right now. I do see that we had quite a few questions coming through, so thank you very much for putting those questions through. I don't think we have that much time left, so what I'm going to do is just go through a couple of the questions in front of me, and Raquel, feel free to stop me at any point when we feel like we're running out of time.
Thank you, Rory.
Cool.
We will follow up by email if you don't get to most of the
if I can't get through all the questions, we'll certainly still answer them, and we'll follow up by email. So don't worry, you're covered. Cool. Okay, let's have a look here. So someone's asked about the privacy. So what happens with the copy I enter in ChatGPT? Yeah, that's a good question. I sort of touched on it briefly earlier. It depends on what technology you're using. So if you are using ChatGPT, which most likely you are because it's the most popular one, as I mentioned, they are not overly transparent with what they do with your data. In fact, they do say that if you use their technology from an API standpoint, meaning that if you integrate ChatGPT into your product, it doesn't retain your data. But if you interact with it directly, they basically retain your data and they can use it to train their model. And so in terms of your privacy, I mean, generally speaking, you'd hope you'd be okay. But like I said before, I wouldn't go putting anything too private or protected in there just in case, because there is that risk that A, they're not being overly transparent with what they do with it, and B, the model could be trained on that data that you put in there. So I think if you're dealing with IP protected content, I would be careful, and maybe what I would do is find a way to ask the question or produce the prompt in a way that doesn't use your protected data but still gets you the answer that you want. So hopefully that answers that question a little bit. Someone else has asked, how can I create a chatbot on my site that uses ChatGPT? I suspect the quality of the chatbot would be extremely high, helping with online conversions. What are the current best apps to use? Yeah, that's another really good question. And actually, that's one of the first opportunities that people kind of saw with this technology, because it's actually been around for quite a long time, or as in the goal of creating like a naturally speaking chatbot for customer service. I know companies like, for example, Drift Chat, they're a company that do chatbots. They've been working on this product called conversational AI for years, and they were building it, I believe anyway, using their data they had access to. But this technology like ChatGPT with access to all of the data feasibly is going to come through and really shake up the space. Here's the problem with creating chatbots using ChatGPT. If you were to just get ChatGPT and put it into a chatbot on your website, it wouldn't work very well, because it's going to create completely open-ended conversations with the people that interact with it. And it will very quickly veer away from the content of your products and services and your website into absolutely anything you can think of. And so you don't actually want that in a chatbot. You want it to be completely, operating within the space of the context of your business. And so what you feasibly could do is integrate ChatGPT technology into your chatbot, but then go through a grounding process like what I described before in terms of feeding the model custom data, as in all the data on your website, and then saying to the model, hey, only give responses based on this data from our website. And so that is not necessarily, a one-click and you're finished kind of exercise. That's something that, someone like Ryan could come through and help you with. But certainly, if you were to do that, the chatbot would be extremely powerful. It would basically be able to speak to a human-like level pretty quickly. So huge opportunity there. So you're thinking along the right lines. You have another question here. When can we buy Copilot, Microsoft Copilot? Okay, yeah. So I'd love to know. It's supposedly sometime this year is the current thinking. There's no official release date for Microsoft Copilot. Same with Google. Google have their own version of Microsoft Copilot that is currently in the works, but not officially announced as release date. The Microsoft Copilot, I believe, is in a kind of early access preview mode right now. So some lucky people have access to it, but I think it's more from a kind of technical testing standpoint. And so they must be under some kind of embargo or something where they can't share what they're learning about it or show you anything. So I don't know, unfortunately, when exactly it's coming out, but it should be sometime this year. And I do highly recommend keeping an eye on that one because it's gonna really shake up the workplace very quickly. So another good question. Why does ChatGPT give me different results if I run a query multiple times? Yeah. It's an interesting one because when I first started playing with ChatGPT, I also ran into that, and I found it to be quite frustrating, honestly, because sometimes you can give it a prompt and it will give you an answer that you really, really liked, and then for whatever reason you move on with your day, you go back a couple of days later and you want to get that same kind of response and you can't. And I touched on it earlier with this thing called temperature, where it's baked into the model that it actually varies its predicted next word. So it's not always a guaranteed 100% that the next word in a sentence is going to be this. It kind of has a probability weighted into it, so that it gives you more natural sounding results. Like I said before, like a human doesn't always give you the exact same response every time you ask them something. And so by adding in some variability, it sounds more human-like, but also it can come up with more creative outputs. If you give it if it comes up with the same thing every time, you can imagine you're going to run out of creative juices pretty quickly. So that's why it doesn't give you the same result every time. However, Microsoft Bing Chat, which is their version, Microsoft's version of ChatGPT, which I showed you, actually has, maybe I can quickly share even, has these features called balanced and creative. Let me come up with a new topic. So you see on the screen here in Bing Chat, it gives you the option to define the conversation style. And so by default, it's on this thing called more balanced, but you can make it more creative or more precise. And depending on which mode you pick, it will actually reduce or increase the variability in its response. So that's another kind of interesting feature that Microsoft Bing have baked in that ChatGPT hasn't, that it allows you to control the level of variability in its response. And so if you really want to get the same answers every time, or similar answers every time, you can use the precise functionality. Whereas if you want to go wild and you want lots of variability, you want to be creative, you want to brainstorm, then you might want to use the creative. But as you can imagine, it starts off on balanced mode. So that's kind of an interesting look at how the different tools approach that problem that you just mentioned. So really good question and worth keeping that in mind.
Hey, Rory, we've got some
yes.
amazing questions. I hate to be Debbie Downer, but we need to wrap it up. So we'll follow up via email, and hopefully people will return in June when you deliver the next webinar, or reach out to us in the meantime. So I'll be the bad cop here.
No worries,
no
worries. Yeah, no worries. But thank you again, everyone, for your questions, by the way. We look forward to answering them after this call.
Thank you very much. This is a fascinating topic. Every answer begets 10 more questions. So for our audience, we want to know if we delivered on your expectations. You will receive a quick survey, and please tell us what you liked about this webinar and what we can do better next time. If we didn't get to your questions, not to worry, we will follow up by email. So we're here. You will receive also an email with a link to this presentation as well as the video. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. If you have any questions, reach out to me at Raquel Hirsch at godemandgen.com. And I'll be happy to work with you. And maybe you're interested in working with one of our 38 consultants. Happy to deliver that for you. Introduce you to the right consultant to work with you to solve your AI challenges today. Tomorrow might be too late. Next up, stay tuned for a June webinar where we're going to be focusing on AI tools for marketing and sales. So without further ado, thank you very much. It's been a thrill to put this presentation together. Thank you, Rory. Great job. And I look forward to hearing from everybody. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Bye.